In 1492, Christopher Columbus rediscovered the New World when he arrived in the Bahamas. While many people probably got there before him, like Scandinavians, nomadic Asian hunters, Irish, Africans, and the Chinese, they were long gone by the time he arrived. Sent on a quest to get more material for slavery and mines, Columbus's arrival led to tons of Europeans migrating to the Americas, soon introducing smallpox and wiping out most of the indigenous Native American tribes. The remaining Native Americans were dealt with harshly, and Europeans turned to Africans as a source of labor, leading to slavery.
Rumors of an unknown continent kindled eagerness in European explorers with a thirst for fame. Voyagers from ethnically diverse backgrounds vied for claims in the New World, competing to be one of the first. In 1499, Amerigo Vespucci set sail under Spain to write detailed accounts of the East Coast. Mapmakers based their maps off of his accounts, hence America. Shortly after, Ferdinand Magellan became the first to circumnavigate the globe. Mexico's Hernando Cortes crushed the Aztecs through attacks and smallpox. Ponce de Leon set claims on Florida for Spain while searching for gold. John Cabot laid the basis for the English along the east coast of the Americas. In 1608, Henry Hudson, heard of the Hudson River, claimed Manhattan for the Dutch. Jacques Cartier explored Canada and claimed the area for the French. As these various European powers developed in the New World, settling became inevitable.
There were three major European nations that established settlements in the Americas: Spain, France, and England. Spain explored because of the four Gs: gold, glory, God, and goods. They laid claim to all of these places. Spain settled the first permanently occupied settlement in Florida. They also established the encomienda system, which put Native Americans in a state of slavery. Several years later, the Spanish Armada was defeated, and the Spanish Empire declined. Now it was France's turn. France laid claim to Canada and areas around the Mississippi. Their first settlement was in Quebec and had less than 60,000 people. Known as New France, not a lot of people lived there due to its poor farmland, isolation, and subjection to Native American attacks. Finally, England started settling after Queen Elizabeth I came to power. She enlisted Sir Walter Raleigh to settle at Roanoke, but people didn't like it, so they came back. When they tried again and a supply ship was sent to the island, nobody was found and it became known as the Lost Colony. Then, joint stock companies, in which groups of people invested money together, started to form. The Virginia Company first received a charter for a colony and settled in Jamestown, so people started looking for gold. However, a harsh winter led to the colonists having to resort to cannibalism. In 1612, John Rolfe successfully cultivated tobacco, breeding one of the first cash crops. With the newfound tobacco craze and other successes, the first legislative assembly, the House of Burgesses, was created.
There were three types of colonies: royal colonies, in which a king or queen had total control; proprietary colonies, in which a king or queen picked a representative to run the colony; and self-governing colonies, in which the colonists controlled the colony. The colonial social structure was much like a pyramid, with the gentry at the top and slaves at the bottom. Small farmers were the most common, but there were also manual workers who hired additional help. Now, life in the colonies was different from what we usually learn. The mother was the most important person in the family, having about 10 to 11 children on average. Mothers raised children, cooked and cleaned, sewed clothes, and helped out on the farm. Children also helped out on the farm, especially the boys, who learned trade from their fathers that worked on both the farm and in shops. Girls would spend more time around the house, learning how to be a mother. Only males were given a formal education, and depending on the colony that they lived in, they would either go to school or have a tutor. The goal of school was to learn to read and write, mainly so that they could be better Christians. Speaking of writing, freedom of the press started forming with the John Peter Zenger case, in which Zenger criticized the governor of New York, was sued for libel, but then was excused by the court, as he simply wrote the truth. Colonies were pretty behind the rest of the world concerning art, but in science they had the great Benjamin Franklin. This guy was an amazing inventor, thinker, and writer. He wrote the Poor Richard's Almanac, which was the second most popular book in the colonies, after the Bible, of course. Anyway, let's look more into the specific colonies.
Tobacco is but an Indian.
The first English settlement was created in Virginia, known as Jamestown. It had a tobacco-based economy and eventually developed a plantation system with indentured servants. The indentured servants worked to pay back their debt, and after 7 to 10 years of service, were given their own land. They would also get tools, animals, and clothes, which were referred to as freedom dues, and their voyage was paid for. The labor-intensive cash crop required fertile soil and arduous work, leading to a demand for land. So, the head-right system was established, giving each plantation owner 50 acres of land for every indentured servant they brought into the colony. People pushed westward, which angered the Native Americans. Life in the South was rural. There was a lack of cities in comparison to New England, and the houses were typically farther apart. However, when the indentured servitude died out, they needed another source of labor. They thus decided on African slaves. Slaves were brought to the southern colonies by the Middle Passage, a forced voyage from Africa to the Americas. They were sold into slavery by the kings and princes of tribes. The voyage had terrible conditions. It was dark, dirty, smelly, and overcrowded. The slave ship was filled to twice its capacity. Africans were humiliated as they were seen as property instead of people. Many resorted to suicide, and around 40% would die on the voyage by other means, such as disease. Upon arrival, slaves were unloaded and sold at slave auctions. Once they were sold, they were subject to slave codes. They couldn't marry, read or write, or have any legal rights for that matter. They were punished severely for any wrongdoing and were in general very lonely. Slavery was the most prominent in Virginia, where they took up half the population, but it was present in the other colonies as well. Maryland also had a tobacco-based economy with a plantation system. It was created as a safe haven for Catholics, but as time went on, they became outnumbered by Protestants, leading to the Act of Toleration, which guaranteed rights to all Christians. Well, almost all.
That into dust return we must.
In 1712, North Carolina formally separated from South Carolina. South Carolina worked in connection with the West Indies, producing sugarcane, but their principal crop was rice. North Carolina, however, was known for its pirates. They prided themselves on breaking the law and being outcasts, as rich plantation owners kept on pushing them away. The last colony in the South was Georgia, known as the Buffer Colony. It protected South Carolina against Spanish Florida and was viewed as a charity colony due to its housing of drunks, criminals, outlaws, and the poor. Georgia produced silk and wine, and it tried to get slavery outlawed, but failed. The New England colonies were home to one of the most successful settlements in America, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was founded by non-separatist Puritans and participated in the fishing, shipbuilding, and fur trading industry. John Winthrop, the governor, wanted it to be an example of a city upon a hill. However, there were some dissenters. Anne Hutchinson challenged the Puritan way, so she was put on trial and kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Roger Williams tried to break away from the Church of England, but eventually escaped to Rhode Island and founded his own colony. Overall, the Massachusetts colony consisted of separatists, the Radical Puritans. It was founded by 102 settlers on the Mayflower who accidentally landed in Plymouth instead of Virginia. Rhode Island was known for its religious toleration. It was a strongly independent, self-governing colony, and thus not well liked by the other colonies. They called it the Lord's Debris, as it was made up of people that nobody wanted. Connecticut was also self-governing, and they were known for creating the Fundamental Orders, a document outlining a democratically controlled government. Finally, New Hampshire, which was inhabited by the overgrowth of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was known for its fishing and trading.
After Henry Hudson's explorations, the Dutch created a new settlement called New Netherlands, now known as New York. The Dutch faced major problems since their colonies were led by poor leaders and were more concerned with profit. It didn't have any form of democracy nor any freedom of religion. Because it was so poorly run, it was constantly attacked by Native Americans. In 1664, Charles II gave New York to James, who threatened to invade the Dutch, resulting in their secession of the land. The Dutch left their legacy, however their chief crop of wheat carried on to Pennsylvania. Founded by William Penn, who sought to create land for the Quakers, Pennsylvania was a very successful colony, as it consisted of well-planned cities and it sustained peace with the Native Americans. It was additionally one of the best advertised colonies, as it provided freedom of worship and was against military service. Meanwhile, James, the Duke of York, gave part of the New Jersey colony to proprietors who sold the land to the Quakers. They split the land into East and West Jersey, and it became a royal colony. Lastly, Delaware was taken over by the Dutch, but after they left the colony, Delaware was controlled by Pennsylvania. Since the English provided no money for colonial defense, each colony created their own militia, which proved to be useful during conflict with the natives. In the Anglo-Powhatan War, Jamestown declared war against Native Americans. Relations were improved when John Rolfe married Pocahontas. In the Pequot War, which consisted of the New England colonies, 500 Pequot Indians were killed, forever ending their tribe. King Philip's War started when King Philip created the Native American Confederacy and killed tons of settlers. He halted the western boundary of the New England colonies, marking the first large-scale military action by the colonial militia. Finally, Bacon's Rebellion occurred when Nathaniel Bacon led an uprising in response to Governor William Berkeley's refusal to protect the colonists from Indian attacks. He gathered 1,000 men and burned down the settlement of Jamestown, vowing to kill all Native Americans. Later, colonial unity commenced with the New England Confederation.
With the growing appeal of the colonies, more and more people started to immigrate to the Americas. The Scots-Irish were the first to come and were known as frontier people. The Germans kept to themselves with their culture and language, but brought about many inventions such as the wagon and rifle. Lastly, Africans were forced to immigrate to the colonies for slavery. As the population rose, the importance of religion went down, and people began to question the accepted Christian ideas. The church thus created the halfway covenant, allowing people to join the church even if they hadn't officially converted. An important event was the Salem witch trials, which occurred in Salem, Massachusetts. A group of girls began to experience fits of rages, and they blamed the rages on women who bewitched them. This sparked a massive witch hunt, with almost 200 people being put on trial and a small fraction executed as well. In the early 18th century, Europe and its colonies experienced a wave of religious change known as the Great Awakening. Figures like George Whitefield, the Great Awakener, preached about the emptiness of material goods, leading to more colonial colleges being founded and an increase in the accessibility of religion. I'm sure you're wondering how these colonies could grow so much given that they were under English rule. Well, James I, Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, and Charles II, who were all ruling over the colonies, were pretty much indifferent to colonial lifestyles. They led through a method called salutary neglect, in which control over the colonies was relaxed, but English officials stayed. So the colonies could grow independently from British rule, but England would still profit, as outlined in the Navigation Acts. These acts required all trade with the colonies to be carried in English vessels. They were rooted in mercantilism, the idea that a nation's power depends on its wealth, and were enforced by the Dominion of England, a group of several New England colonies with the aim of tightening British control. Eventually, this all led to the Anglo-Dutch War, as the colonists began to resent their English officials. Other notable wars in North America were King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, and the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was fought between France and its Indian allies, and Britain and its Indian allies. The war started in America and extended to Europe, where it was called the 7 Years' War. It was initially over the claims to the Ohio River Valley, but it soon escalated to a much bigger conflict. After a string of defeats, Britain called together a meeting of all the colonies to try to renew the alliance with the Iroquois. However, nobody would sign the agreement, and the British were beaten a couple of years later once again. So William Pitt took over the war effort to save the country. He replaced older generals, gave colonies money for troops, and turned the fighting over to the militia. Soon, the tide of the war turned. Britain began capturing a bunch of places, gaining more and more control. When they defeated the French at the Battle of Quebec and captured the core city of Montreal, Britain finally won. The war was formally ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763 that agreed on 6 terms. 1. France would cede all of Canada and the land between the Mississippi and the Appalachians to Britain. 2. France would cede the land west of the Mississippi to Spain. 3. Britain would keep Florida. 4. France would keep 2 islands off Newfoundland exclusively for fishing. 5. Britain would give back the Sugar Islands, or the West Indies, to France. And 6. Cuba would be given back to Spain. This war was overall significant because the French were finally out of North America, and the colonies no longer viewed the British as invincible. They gained experience in the militia and grew more familiar with one another. As time passed, George Washington soon emerged as the leader for all of the colonies.